Welcome. You're listening to The Weather Lounge, a podcast by WeatherWorks. Get ready to explore the world of weather and connect with engaging guests, bringing you fun and thought-provoking stories of just how weather shapes our lives, sometimes in ways you've never imagined. So, join us as we unravel the mysteries of the atmosphere. Today's episode starts.
Hey there, and welcome back to the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and of course, we come to you from our WeatherWorks headquarters located in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And joining me today is fellow meteorologist and Weather Lounge producer, Michael Priante. Hey there, Mike.
Hey, Brad. It's good to be the other host here on the Weather Lounge. Usually, I'm the one listening in. Of course, we have our three powwow sessions with Jen, although Jen can't be here today. But I'm excited. I don't know if you are.
Everyone's getting busy.
Yes, everyone's busy, Brad. But I know I'm excited. I don't know if you are, Brad, about today's episode. We're going to be diving into what the winter might hold here. It might sound interesting for some. If you're a snow lover, if you're a snow hater, definitely listen in, because there will be some things that could change the forecast. We'll definitely talk about that in a little bit, though.
Yeah, we've been advertising it, and so it's time for our annual winter outlook for 2024, 2025. Now, just to give everyone a reference, we are recording this as of November 20th. So again, we're going by what has happened and what hopefully we can figure out what's going to happen here over the next 3 to 4 months. And joining us again here in the Weather Lounge for all those answers is our one of our long-range specialists here at WeatherWorks, meteorologist Kyle Leahy. What's up there, Kyle?
Hey guys, it's nice to be finally talking winter with you guys. finally done with summer.
Yeah, and we gotta give a shout out to Kevin Winters also. He's one of our long-range guys. Him and Kyle do a phenomenal job here at WeatherWorks for our long-range outlooks, and we appreciate what they do, and of course we all kind of look forward to what they have to say, and hopefully everything kind of pans out. So, Mike, I guess you can introduce Kyle again and put him on the spot.
Yes. Let's put Kyle on the spot here. Sorry. So before we get into the nitty gritty here with what we're looking at with the winter outlook, how about a quick description here, Kyle, if you can, on really like what would you say sums up how the winter season will be? Specifically, we're looking at the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, but also I guess too in the Midwest as well.
Yeah, so I would say overall things are going to be pretty changeable. That's especially the case in the Midwest. A lot of these winters, they usually featured like some pretty severe cold snaps at times. Those push them to the Midwest first. So Midwest, I think it's going to be a pretty average winter in terms of snow, but in terms of the swings, you can go from quite warm to frigid within the span of a week. And it's similar in the Northeast, but generally just leaning a bit warmer. So I would still expect, a warmer than average winter, which is usually the case, but I would not be surprised if there were, a few 2-3 week periods that were like legitimately cold, but it should average out warm.
Yeah, an overall warmer winter doesn't mean no snow, and especially in places like New England. But it's been kind of a lean last couple of years, but we got some silver linings, I think, that we're kind of looking ahead to. That just kind of popped up in the last few weeks, and really, that's kind of what we're going to talk about here. So, Kyle, why don't you start off with that, and then we'll just, we've all talked like a month ago, and things weren't looking all that great for this upcoming winter. But just recently now, like I just mentioned, we've got some things that are changing, aren't they?
We were initially expecting just not like a wall-to-wall warm winter. We were always sort of looking at late December into mid-January being the main kind of, cold and snow for the Northeast and also the Midwest, but generally for the Northeast. That was kind of the window. And that was mainly because of tropical convection in the Pacific sort of drives the pattern, or likes to drive the pattern. And it was generally pointing towards like a warmer direction for the Northeast and the Midwest, or honestly most of the kind of U.S. east of the plains. But as you were saying, things have definitely trended in the other direction, which I do have to say is pretty surprising to kind of end November and start December. It's a pretty far departure from what we were thinking.
And I guess, of course, the big elephant in the room this year is everyone's reading about La Nina. La Nina, La Nina, La Nina. But even that has kind of shown some signs of changing here as we go into the winter months. And I've seen a lot of variability going all the way back to this summer, where it's kind of they've been kicking the can down the road, like La Nina's starting now, La Nina's starting now, and it just really hasn't gotten to that point yet. Explain that part.
Yeah, so initially, all the way back in the spring, a lot of the seasonal guidance was predicting some of them even like a strong event, which at the time made sense because we had like a top five El Nino last year. But yeah, and then as you were saying, as we've kind of headed towards into the summer and now into autumn, it just really hasn't developed. A part of that could be some kind of hangover from last year where you have the El Nino just kind of messing with things. Also, the climate is changing. So there are little wrinkles that we might not even really be aware of. And this stuff is also just pretty difficult to forecast. But what's interesting is that a lot of the time, once you get past the spring, the predictability of El Nino and La Nina increases a lot. But a lot of the guidance didn't do a good job, even when it was initializing in like August and September. They still didn't even get it right. So it certainly is surprising. There definitely have been a decent amount of surprises in the last, I'd say, like 2 or 3 weeks.
The big thing that when I think of El Nino and La Nina, I don't know, Brad, you probably know this, but maybe Kyle, too, the sketch from SNL with Chris Farley.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
The classic sketch where he's just like El Nino.
El Nino.
And it's just I
was
think
that in the
of
late
that,
90s?
Yeah, I think it was John
For
Candy,
that one?
wasn't it? Oh no,
Was it for that one?
yeah. No, that wasn't John Candy. That was
No, that was Chris Farley.
Chris Farland, right.
Chris Farley, yeah.
Yeah, it had to be with the 97, 98, like Super El Nino or something.
That's probably
what
why
it is. That's my guess.
But I just think of that, and I think it's funny because you get these La Nina, El Nino, and people think still people I think don't understand the difference between El Nino and La Nina, and they think like one is warmer, one is cooler, but it's really complicated because you can have good winters with the El Ninos and La Ninas. It just depends on other things, right, Kyle?
Yeah, exactly. Like there are some El Ninos, like last year, where they just sort of overwhelm the pattern. El Ninos usually have a stronger jet stream in the Pacific, and what that can do is just sort of push all of that Pacific air like into the United States, which is just kind of warm and moderated. It's really difficult to get very cold air. And then, but there are some El Ninos where that jet is kind of tamed a little bit, and you get some cold winters. And it's the same thing with La Nina, where a lot of the time people associate La Nina with warmer, drier winters here, but there have been La Ninas in the past that have been quite cold and stormy. So yeah, it's not an exact science. There's a lot of variation, even between different El Ninos and different La Ninas, let alone between kind of like, each group sort of. There's a lot that can kind of happen behind the scenes, I guess.
So, the other big question that we always talk about and address is, the Arctic Oscillation, the North America, all the telekinetic. So let's go over that real quick. Explain to everyone what like a negative NAO is versus a positive, and also bring in the PNA, because that's also been the driving force, I think, in the Pacific, really for us the last couple of winters, and why we haven't really gotten a lot of snow here in the Northeast.
Yeah, exactly. So the Arctic Oscillation and North Atlantic Oscillation, so that's the AO and NAO respectively, those kind of moderate, well, the Arctic Oscillation especially, it's basically just a gauge of like how strong the polar vortex is. And contrary to what one might think, you actually want a weaker polar vortex, because that's how it kind of gets disrupted and brings colder air down, out of off the North Pole. If it's really strong, it just kind of keeps all of it stuck up there. The North Atlantic Oscillation, that's kind of more of a measure. So like a negative NAO would mean like a lot of high pressure, generally like near Greenland. So you can have a warm pattern with a negative NAO. It's kind of, I would say it's like the most misunderstood one. All that it really does is it just keeps things, like it just slows the pattern down. So if you want like a really, really large storm, like a top 10 snowstorm or something like that along the East Coast, you pretty much need that to be negative because it slows things down.
Buckles the jet stream.
Yes, exactly. And then when you go to like the PNA, which is the Pacific North American pattern, that basically just describes if there's high or low pressure pretty much, like along the West Coast and in the Gulf of Alaska. So for the East, and the Midwest generally, if you want it to be cold, you want a positive PNA. And we've seen a lot of negative PNAs over the last couple of years, which makes
That
sense.
just opens the gates for Pacific air to come across the country.
Yeah, exactly. So you can have times, and what's interesting is that the PNA is the one that's most correlated with El Nino and La Nina. So like La Ninas, which we've seen a lot of over the last several years, have negative PNAs. So what's interesting is that even if you do displace like Arctic air, which has happened at times, it just kind of gets stuck in the Rockies, and maybe the plains will get cold, and maybe even the Midwest. But it's really difficult when you have a negative PNA to push all that cold air east into the Northeast. And it could happen for a little bit, but if those patterns are persistent, you might get 2 or 3 days of like cold air, but it just zips along, and it's really difficult to get like a persistently cold pattern.
Yeah, and I think those teleconnections are certainly very important. I mean, we like to think of them as the alphabet soup of the atmosphere, right?
Yeah,
when
pretty
looking
much.
at the patterns. But I guess going into this here now, if we go into the winter season, one thing that a lot of people really hear about, and it's like a buzzword, and it's blocking, right? And first of all, let's just explain to people what is blocking, why is it important, and also, do we see any of that? Is it favorable this year, or what are the signs that we're seeing for potential blocking this year?
Yeah, so blocking it pretty much it just describes like a persistent high pressure, and it could really be anywhere. Like a lot of the time, people talk about Greenland blocking in the winter, and it happens so often that one would think that when someone says blocking, they're only talking about Greenland, but that's not necessarily the case. I guess in the winter, the two spots that are the most important for blocking or lack thereof would be Greenland and Alaska, and they do two different things. So if you have blocking over Greenland, or just again a persistent area of high pressure that can last for 1 or 2 weeks and really just sit in the same spot. The Greenland blocking again moderates like how quickly things basically move along. What it also does is it puts a lot of low pressure in Southeast Canada. So when you have storms that are trying to like move into the Ohio Valley, it squishes them south pretty much. So that's how you get a lot of those slower moving systems that can bring snow to like the mid-Atlantic or even the Southeast sometimes if the blocking's strong enough in towards Greenland. So there's that kind of blocking. That's a negative NAO. But then there's also Alaskan blocking, and that's called the negative EPO. So that's the East Pacific oscillation. So there's a lot of them. But basically, Alaskan blocking, if you have Alaskan blocking, that's how you get like frigid patterns, at least somewhere in the United States. If you pair that Alaskan blocking with the negative PNA or just the trough on the West Coast, low pressure, then that's how you get those patterns where it's frigid in the Rockies, but it's warm in the East. If you pair the Alaskan blocking with, kind of like a weak ridge along the West Coast, that's how you get that colder air to kind of move east quicker. And that's also, that Alaskan blocking is common with like some of the coldest winters that we've seen. So you could talk about like the winters of like 2013 and 2014, which were very, very cold for like a lot of the country. But blocking generally, it just displaces colder air somewhere into the United States for the most part. Like 2020, 2021 with like that big Arctic outbreak that like wrecked Texas.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that was due to a lot of blocking. So blocking is pretty important, and a lack of blocking, if you have like a really strong polar vortex, that just kind of keeps cold air bottled up towards the pole. So some of our warmest winters just featured a lack thereof. So it's pretty important.
Okay. And for this year, are we seeing it being a favorable year for blocking for us, specifically for the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, but also I guess blocking could sometimes help for the Midwest, or is it mostly a Northeast thing?
It's mostly a Northeast thing. You can get storms in the Midwest. I mean, yeah, but like blocking doesn't really correlate very well with storms. It's more of like you usually have just kind of like low pressure along the West Coast, and you get those systems to kind of ride up through the Ohio Valley. That's generally how that happens. But in terms of blocking, what's interesting with this winter is that if you were to use like the more commonly used kind, like, the way that most people use blocking, if you were to use that kind of definition, which is the Greenland blocking, I wouldn't really anticipate much of it. I or generally with the analogs that we were looking at are just years that are more similar to this one. There really hasn't been a big indication for it. However, there is a stronger signal for some kind of Alaskan blocking to form, which would make things a bit colder. That's also one of the years that we've been kind of looking at, or a couple of years that we've been kind of looking at, 2013 into 2014 and 2021 into 2022. Those years did have quite a bit of Alaskan blocking. So I would say if you're using the more common definition of it, or the one that people usually see the most, I would say no. But if you're talking about the more broad meteorological definition, yeah, I would say that you could see blocking into Alaska, perhaps into like the Western Pacific or like the Northwestern Pacific, kind of into like Eastern Russia, Siberia, around there. So it's kind of a complicated answer, but I think it's one that's kind of worth.
Right, but and to go back to that Ohio Valley stuff, you need that blocking overhead, or at least up into Greenland even, because it'll prevent those cutters from happening, right? Because if it's not there, then we stay on the warm side here in the Northeast. We get maybe some wintry mix over the rain, and then temperatures in the 40s. Versus like the blocking you were mentioning, it shoves everything south, and it gives a better chance, of course, for even the Mid-Atlantic to get involved, and then especially the Northeast and New England after that, and you get those coastal riders. But and again, as I said, we're recording this on the 20th of November, and we've got blocking. We've gone from the 60s and 70s and 2 months of dry weather basically here in the Northeast we're like, what's going on? And all of a sudden now we get this winter pattern. So I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, there is, like, right now there is very, very, very strong blocking, which is why we're going to see this kind of just.
Hopefully we can carry this over till like January or even December.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that's kind of interesting is that the pattern that develops for like late November into like early December, it's not always indicative of the way the winter's going to go. Like, you can't just copy paste like the pattern that we have now into the rest of the winter. I wish it was that simple, but it's not. But it, like, a lot of the time, like, the flavor of the winter is sort of shown around now. And although I don't anticipate this level of blocking kind of near Greenland, the blocking near Alaska that's been showing up to kind of close out the month is pretty interesting, and it does match some of the colder years that we've been seeing. So I think that that's something to kind of monitor, and that's also kind of that surprise that we've sort of been talking about, because I don't think there were that many people that were, I mean, myself included, that were expecting this cold of a pattern to sort of set up for the end of the month.
And when we talk about Arctic outbreaks and stuff here, even in the Northeast, maybe a lot of our folks don't understand. I mean, that cold air, yeah, it's coming from Canada, but tell them where it's really originating from, Kyle.
Yeah, exactly. So when you do have that Alaskan ridging, especially when it stretches into like parts of Russia, you're basically you're it's something called cross-polar flow, which doesn't happen all that often. But like true cross-polar flow, which actually is sort of showing up to kind of close out the month. It's a matter of whether it verifies or not, but the signal is there. You're literally getting air from like the Arctic Circle. Like, it's a very cold pattern, and like Siberia. So you're not just getting air from Canada. Well, you are getting air from Canada, but that air is coming from a colder part of, the northern hemisphere.
Right.
So,
it's almost, if you can think of it visually, you can take, if you're thinking like a hose, and you have the hose in a certain shape that's stretched from northern Russia right across the top of the globe, which is the Arctic, and then that hose kind of, it connects itself down through the Northeast, and that's where your source of the colds come from, just flowing right over the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, exactly. And those kinds of patterns, if you were to kind of see like an earlier season snow event, like Thanksgiving through like the first week of December, you pretty much need that kind of pattern, because that's the only one that brings cold enough air into the flow for you to see snow that early. So it's definitely an interesting development.
So I know we talked a little bit about certain years in the past. I know Kyle brought up 2013, 2014, 2020, 2021. But Kyle, for this upcoming winter, I know it's hard to say that it's going to be an exact copy to some other winter, but what years are we looking at are more favorable and least favorable in comparison to what this winter might pan out to be?
Yeah, so it's always difficult with analogs because I feel like many people they'll kind of see a comparison to a year and be like, "Oh, so like we should expect something like that." So like for example, like 2013, 2014 was like an absurdly cold and snowy year. Which isn't really why we use them. It's like the way that we pick the years is you look at different features of a pattern. So it could be something like ENSO, so like El Nino La Nina, or it could be something like the PDO, which basically is just like North Pacific sea surface temperatures or whatever. Or it could be something related to the stratosphere or like solar activity, which has been very high, hence the auroras. So stuff like that, and you kind of pick years that have the most similarities, and that 2013-14 is one of them. I do think that, and there are also some years that were like very warm, that were also pretty decent analogs. Like 2011, 2012 was like notoriously warm. It's like super warm. It's basically a non-winter. And 2022, 2023, that was also another year that was quite lean in terms of snow. Based on what we're seeing to close out late November, I kind of have to lean more in the direction of the colder years, even though our forecast is quite warm, because really a couple things. So when we were kind of crafting the forecast,
Crafting, I love that.
yeah, a lot of the variables were really pointing towards a warm year, and also this colder pattern that we're seeing wasn't even like a thought because like it was just way too far out, and even models that did go out that far didn't have it developing, which makes sense because it's again kind of a surprise. So even though we have, and I would still anticipate overall like a warmer winter than average, just given the way things have gone over the last few years. Honestly, it's just difficult to forecast a cold winter until it happens. Um, I'm inclined to lean more on kind of like the 2013s and 2021s of the world rather than the kind of just super warm, lean winters. Again, like the 01, 02s and the 11-12s. Again, not to say that we're going to be seeing a year quite as snowy as like a 13-14, but like something like a 2021, 2022 kind of makes sense because that year had like a pretty warm December, which honestly doesn't really seem like we're going to see. But that had like that nice, which is why we liked it so much. Like honestly, like before this colder pattern was showing up, 21, 22 looked pretty good because you had like a warmer start to December. And then you had like a colder period, like a 3-week period from like Christmas through mid-January that was quite cold and snowy, like even in the mid-Atlantic. And then as you closed out the year in February, things warmed up. But given the way La Nina's kind of performing, which it officially might not even be a La Nina, you can't even really lock in like a warm February. Like you kind of can't because that implies that La Nina is going to have a big impact, and it doesn't like there aren't really any indications that it's going to do that. So I think things have kind of, if you had to, choose a way for things to have broken, it would certainly be on the colder side if we're picking away here. So this also kind of, hinges on the pattern that's showing up towards Thanksgiving to actually verify, which is its own can of worms. However, what's been nice is that over the last few years, we've seen these kind of colder patterns show up in like the kind of late, medium to long range. So we're talking like, 8 to 15 days. And invariably over the last few years, you'll see like that a lot of the cold air being dumped into the west and more of like a ridge or high pressure in the southeast poke up. But interestingly, kind of in that day 8 range, we've actually seen the opposite where modeling had kind of like a southeast ridge and it's gotten tamped down So that's kind of breaking the trend of what we've been seeing over the last few years. So I think there's a reason, at least if you want snow, for optimism. I think, which is a pretty far cry from what we were thinking a few weeks ago. Because a few weeks ago, like the sky was falling, it looked really bad.
Well, if we keep this blocking pattern, we keep on, getting further into the winter season. Even like you said, these marginal events, they turn into just full-blown snow events because climatology keeps on taking over as we get deeper into December and especially January. So
Yeah, exactly. Like if this sweep storm was happening 4 6 weeks from now, it would be much snowier.
right. I think that's about it. Mike, you got anything else?
No, I guess one last thing, Kyle. Here, no, so looking at the whole winter as a whole, what months would you say people should look into or should look out for like the best? If you want the best of winter, what months are we looking at here for the best of winter?
I still think that January is going to be the coldest month, I believe, just kind of based on all the seasonal indicators. I think that, that's kind of the meat of the winter. However, kind of with the way things have changed, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some decent activity to kind of, start December. It wouldn't be shocking. Even to really close out November, there are some signals of, perhaps like an early season snow for mainly like New England, but even farther south, it's not out of the question with how cold things are looking compared to average right now. So I guess broadly speaking, January still looks like the meat of the winter, but like I would keep a watch out for something kind of earlier in the year. I also wouldn't be surprised if this colder pattern kind of moderated a bit as we headed towards like mid-December. That wouldn't be shocking, and then we kind of head towards a colder pattern like Christmas onward. Wouldn't be crazy. And yeah, things are likely going to moderate in February. That's just kind of the way a lot of the analogous years look. But honestly, like I wouldn't completely bank on it. Like it's not as airtight of an idea as it seemed like a month ago.
Right, because La Nina has been so slow to take over.
Yeah, it's been weak, and there have been some El Nino-ish influences kind of lingering. So I wouldn't immediately just bank on February being super warm. Is all. I would still expect it to be warmer than average. I just wouldn't expect like a complete shutout or anything like that at this point.
Do you think the groundhog is going to see a shadow then, or no?
Who knows?
For the end of winter season, yeah.
Probably, yeah.
6 more weeks of winter.
Yeah. Well, some years, Brad, we sometimes have winter get prolonged into, into March.
It's such a
although
March is a crapshoot. Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of places, especially in New England, see snow into March regardless.
Oh yeah.
I think what I'm talking about is more so the snow you see like a freak snowstorm March 15th in like Washington D.C. Versus like, oh yeah, New Hampshire seeing snow March 20th. Well, that's not out of the ordinary. Hell, they can even get snow into April up there. It's not out of the ordinary. But I mean, a late March storm in the Mid-Atlantic certainly is not the most oh yeah, it's gonna happen. It's like, well, no, at that point you're thinking like the trees are starting to bud, the flowers are coming up. You think, oh yeah, spring is here, and then all of a sudden a cold snap and you get a big storm. So I think for those areas it's certainly something that people wouldn't expect, but places up in New England will be like, oh, it is what it is. We won't have spring until late April, early May. So
March isn't looking particularly cold this year. There isn't like a big signal for anything like that, but March is always just.
I'm fine with that. Even if winter starts a little early, let's have the core of winter, December, January, and even early February, and then just start turning the page already to spring. I'd rather have I hate when winter lingers on like it has the last couple of years. It almost seems like, but it doesn't produce much. It's just cold and nasty.
Yeah, exactly. It's different if it actually does something.
Yeah.
So Brad, would you rather, and also Kyle, would you rather have a winter season that starts early and ends early, or starts late and ends late?
Early and then ends in the end of February, right? Let's just get our 40 to 50 inches of snow in those 3 months. November or December, January, February, and then kind of flip to spring.
Fine. Yeah, like a 2010, 2011 is like the perfect winter, where like you have like your blizzard right around Christmas, and then January is pretty active, and then it just ends.
Meteorological spring starts March 1st. Damn it, let's live by that.
I know. Yeah, I mean, early snow is definitely more festive, and we haven't had it in a while.
I agree.
And the sun is lower in the sky, so it sticks around longer too.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, by the end of February, we always talk about sun angle, and you notice the later sun sets, and you're ready to get spring going. So.
And then before you know it, we're going to be talking about the next tropical season.
Oh,
Yep,
all right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
That's enough. All right, Mike, thank you very much. Of course, Kyle, big thanks to you, and of course, Kevin Winters for his specialties with the long-range forecast. Of course, Kyle and Kevin always busy, whether it's a summer outlook or a winter outlook. And, special thanks also out there to Steve Coppertino and Ken Elliott. They also have a hand in all the long-term stuff here. But maybe we'll have Kyle back in the middle of winter. We'll have to see how busy we all get. Maybe we can do an update and see what things look like in January. And hopefully by then we've got some good winter weather still going on, and some winter weather already talk about. Maybe a couple of big systems in early December and January. So we'll see.
Maybe. Yeah, I'm very curious to see how things look.
Yeah, it's funny because I talked to Kyle last week before, and we were planning on doing this podcast, and he started talking like, oh, yeah, like a kid in the candy store. Things are looking up. Well, oh my God, look at this.
It really wasn't looking good to start December. It really looked like pretty
bleak.
Crappy. Yeah, it didn't look like, in terms of what you want to see, this is pretty much like it. It's just a matter of if it's actually winter showing itself or just kind of a temporary thing. I'm more inclined to believe the former a little bit more, but it's really tough to say. You can't really say it with that much confidence yet.
Right. Well, like I said, we can only hope if you do like winter and snow, and then we'll just take it from there. So.
Well, I'm on Team Snow, so here I am.
I hear you. I think we're all on Team Snow. We need some. There's been a couple of lousy winters here in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, so. All right, well, that'll wrap it up for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Weather Lounge, and we'll notify you when a new podcast drops. And you can also follow us on all the big social media platforms. And, of course, visit us at our website at weatherworksinc.com. And, again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to Mike, Kyle, and everyone else on the Long Range team. And we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of the Weather Lounge podcast. Thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on all your favorite podcasting platforms so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have questions or comments? Just email us at weatherlounge@weatherworksinc.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can also learn more about our parent company, WeatherWorks, by visiting weatherworksinc.com and checking them out on social media as well. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, stay curious and stay weather-wise.